We looked at all the major streams of Buddhism, and we said one of the ways we can characterize or differentiate between them is the ideal practitioner. In each case, there's an ideal practitioner. So in the Mahayana, that ideal is the bodhisattva. So bodhisattva means awakened being, someone who is maybe qualified, if you will, to leap off this wheel of samsara, to land on the other side, but chooses to stay here in order to help other beings cross over first, to liberate other beings. So the bodhisattva's vow is to be the last one to cross over, which of course is really ironic, because if everyone is saying, no, no, you go first, if we're all bodhisattvas, you want everyone to go before you, and the other one next to you is going, no, no, you first, then, there can't be a last one out. So I think it's an illustration of sort of the endlessness of our bodhisattva vows.
We have to save them all, and there's infinite numbers, so
we'll never get to the end. That's right. Okay, so traditionally, the distinction between the arhat from the Theravadan side and the Mahayana bodhisattva was the arhat is said to mainly be practicing for his own liberation. The bodhisattva is said to be practicing for the liberation of everybody, for the sake of everyone. Now, we have to recognize that's a characterization coming from the Mahayana side. Let's not start disparaging people, right? So we need to recognize that. But it's important for us to understand what the characteristics of the bodhisattva are. So there's this grouping called the four great bodhisattvas. Maybe you know these bodhisattvas. So each of these four symbolizes a specific aspect of our practice or something which is important in our tradition. So we have Kannon, we have Fugen, Monju, and Jizo. So there's a lot you can read about these bodhisattvas. There are whole books written about some of these bodhisattvas by contemporary, North American teachers in some cases. There are many images to look at. You can get into the iconography. So if this is interesting for you, I invite you to dig in. So Kannon, Chinese, Guanyin, and Sanskrit Avalokiteshvara. You will see him or her characterized by all of those names. So like most of these bodhisattvas, this is an image or a figure that starts out in India as a male figure. It's now mostly portrayed as a female figure, which is a whole interesting story. Yes. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of forms of Kannon. Some of them have names, and some of them are simply the ways she's been depicted. She's one of the most popular bodhisattvas in Asia, so you can hardly not find a Kannon or an Avalokiteshvara. There are also multiple versions of her name, but overall this name has a meaning about hearing the cries of people who are suffering in the world. So this is somebody who is attentive to, aware of, hearing the cries of people who are suffering. So Kannon appears in the Lotus Sutra. She appears in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Of course, she's in the Heart Sutra that we chant every morning. There's plenty of scripture about Kannon. She's also frequently in the genre of Buddhist miracle tales, taking whatever form seems to be necessary. Usually there's a figure or there's a character in the story, and by the time you get to the end of the story, oh, it turns out that was Kannon. There to save whoever it is that needs to be saved. So even Dogen was supposedly delivered from disaster by Kannon. He's taking his ship back to Japan from China. They had a bad storm. Supposedly Kannon appears floating on the waves next to the boat to save Dogen and to save the ship. So even Dogen had plenty to say about Kannon. Fugen is the bodhisattva of practice. So Fugen or Pushin or Samantabhadra. So if you're here for Rakusatsu and you hear us invoking all those bodhisattvas, one that we do, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, great activity. So Fugen is often depicted holding a lotus flower and riding an elephant. This is the great power of Buddhist practice to overcome things. So the elephant, is strong and will overcome obstacles, and that's kind of the point of that iconography. So the emphasis from Fugen is that action and conduct or behavior are just as important in our practice as thinking and studying and sitting zazen. So what we do, again, with this body, speech, and mind is all about that. That's what Fugen is sort of overseeing for us. There's also connection here with taking and upholding precepts, with the Shila section of the Eightfold Path, right? Action, speech, livelihood. So this is very much about what are we doing in the world. That's what Fugen is typically about. Interestingly, Fugen is the protector of the people who teach the Dharma. So I think of Fugen as the patron saint of Dharma teachers. So Dharma teachers like Fugen. Okay, Monju, or Wenshu, or Manju Shri is the bodhisattva of wisdom. That's who's here in our place where we sit zazen. That's usually in a Soto in Japan. You will see Manjushri there. It's not Shakyamuni. So frequently Manjushri or Monju is depicted with a sword in one hand. Ours is not. Ours is sitting zazen. But if you see a bodhisattva with a sword in one hand, that's probably Manjushri. That sword is for cutting through ignorance, right? So when Esho did her Hosenshiki, one of the things that she had to say was about, the sword taking life and giving life freely, right? So we're cutting through ignorance. Sometimes there's a sword in one hand and a sutra book in the other, which makes sense for a being that's all about wisdom. Typically, Monju is sitting on a lion, like this one. That lion is usually roaring. You might be familiar with that image of a roaring lion as being the voice of Buddha or the voice of Dharma, right? That is Dharma teaching. So it's no coincidence there's a popular Buddhist magazine called The Lion's Roar, right?
Here he is with the sword.
There you go. So if you want to see from Ritoku, you can pass that around. You can see the version right with the sword. As I say, Monju on our altar appears as a monk sitting zazen, sitting on this lion. That's not uncommon in the world of a Japanese sort of Soto. There is a Shaka triad, or a group of 3 of these bodhisattvas that sometimes you will see with Fugen on the right, Monju on the left, Shakyamuni in the middle. So if you're looking around, you might see them grouped together. Somehow they're functioning together. So you've got activity, you have wisdom, and you've got awakening, right? Shakyamuni in the middle. Okay, Jizo, or Dizang, or Chittagarbha, is the bodhisattva of patience and salvation from suffering. Jizo is actually fairly popular in North America, probably second to Kannon. You see lots of little cute Jizos, right? Go into your local, New Age shop, and there's probably little Jizos in there. So Monju is sometimes shown as a monk, like ours is, but Jizo almost always is shown like this. Shaved head, simple clothing, wearing a robe of some kind, usually has a staff with rings on the top, right? One of the important activities that Jizo does, Jizo goes into the hell realms. If you look at the Rokudo, Jizo is the one that goes into the hell realms to save beings, right? So that shaking that staff, that sound is supposed to be awakening us from our delusions, helping us break free from samsara, helping us attain awakening, right? So usually
patience and
salvation from suffering, because Jizo's going to go into the hell realms and pull you out, right? Okay, so Jizo has the staff, sometimes also has a wish-granting jewel. So these 2 things together are the tools for saving these beings. That jewel is kind of blessings, bestowing blessings on suffering beings. Please.
he's also like one of the sort of patron saint of saving for children, travelers, and a couple other things.
Yep.
But he's also immense in pop culture, within Japanese pop culture. There's some movie my cousin loves, and he's like, I'm 30th watch of it, and like we're watching it as we're going off to a hike, and everybody's looking, and part of the movie is a little girl gets lost. When they find her, in the background there are 6 figures.
Yes.
Jizo's usually with like 6 figures, and he so Jizo is there in the background, helped save the child.
Yep.
When I explained this to my cousin, he's like, "Oh no, I had no clue."
There you go. That sounds familiar, which makes me wonder if I've seen that movie.
Totoro or something like that.
I don't remember, but that sounds familiar.
So don't they use those in Japan, sort of like grave markers for children?
Sometimes they're on graves. Yep. So you can see lots of Jizo pictures. Sometimes there's a row of 6 of them outside of the temple or in the graveyard. So yes, you beat me to it, but yes, Jizo, if you're going to do something called a patron saint, Jizo is a protector of children and pregnant women and mothers and travelers and pilgrims and suffering beings. So lots of groups. Okay, so those 4 images, personifications of elements that we consider are important for our practice. So compassion, of course, huge for us. Practice activity, goodness, yes. Wisdom and patience in liberating beings. That sounds like a bodhisattva to me. So wisdom and compassion, of course. Practice and patience in liberating beings. So we might take inspiration from them, just like we might take inspiration from a figure of Shakyamuni, a figure of the Buddha. They just let us remember our aspiration. So if we have figures, pictures, something around, they can help us remember. Remember to practice, remember to cultivate wisdom, remember to show compassion, remember to be patient. But also, all of us who practice are considered bodhisattvas. So we have, and these are only 4 bodhisattvas. There's a long list of other bodhisattvas. You can find lots of them. There's one about studying, and there's lots of them. So we can anthropomorphize, and we can make figures, and we can make deities, and we can conflate Kanon with Virgin Mary and all kinds of things. And also, we are not separate from that activity. So just simply to begin to practice is to vow to be a bodhisattva. So, we do here before at the end of the Dharma talk, we chant those 4 vows. It means we're all already bodhisattvas. We're all already doing these things. Enough about that. So as bodhisattvas, we can just sort of remember we are the physical embodiment of this reality that samsara and nirvana are not separate. We are Buddha nature. We already know the self is empty, and yet we're using this karmic body and our karmic circumstances for the work of liberating beings. So just like these 4 figures are doing that, right? They've chosen to stay in the world of samsara, to keep a physical body, and to use that along with their understanding and their compassion and wisdom to save beings. We can say we're doing the same thing. We have physical form. We have vowed to bring wholesomeness into the world, to help to liberate ourselves and others. So those 2 realities are completely interpenetrated.